I want to tell you about a Saturday morning in New York when I opened a bank statement that was not mine and understood that the last 6 years of my life had a version I had not been shown. Not a dramatic morning, not a morning that announced itself, just a regular Saturday in our apartment in Astoria, Queens. Coffee on the counter, my wife still asleep, me at the kitchen table with a pile of mail I was sorting through. Because sorting the mail on Saturday morning was one of those small domestic rituals that had become mine over 6 years of marriage. The statement was in an envelope that looked like ours. Same bank, same format. I opened it before I looked at the name. The name on the statement was not mine. It was my father-in-law's. I do not know how it ended up in our mail. Wrong apartment number on the envelope, maybe. The building had 40 units, and the mailroom made mistakes. It did not matter how it got there. What mattered was what was inside it. I sat at that kitchen table in Astoria on a Saturday morning, and I read that statement, and I understood something that reorganized every financial memory of the previous 6 years. I put the statement back in the envelope. I finished my coffee. My wife slept for another hour. I said nothing. For 8 months I said nothing. And then I removed everything in a single day. This is that story. My name is not important. My wife's name is Rachel. We had been married for 6 years when that Saturday happened. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Astoria that we had chosen together because it was close to the N train and had good light in the mornings, and was the kind of neighborhood that felt like New York, without performing New York. I worked in financial services in Midtown. Not glamorous, solid, the kind of work that requires attention and produces results that are visible in numbers, and that I had been doing for 9 years with the specific satisfaction of someone who is good at something that matters. Rachel worked in education, a school administrator in the Bronx. She was good at her job, in the way that people who care deeply about something and work hard at it become good at it. She was not in it for the money. She was in it because she believed in it. I loved her for that. I still love her for that. What I did not love, what I sat at that kitchen table understanding on that Saturday morning, was what had been happening around that love for 6 years without my knowledge. Rachel's family. I need to tell you about Rachel's family, because without them, this story does not make sense. Her parents, I'm going to call them Frank and Linda, because those are not their names, were a specific kind of New York family. Queens born and raised, loud at holidays, present at everything. The kind of family that has opinions about every decision and shares those opinions whether or not you asked, and expects that sharing to be received as love, because in their framework, it is love. I had managed that framework for 6 years, not easily, but consistently, because Rachel loved them, and Rachel's love for her family was part of who Rachel was, and you do not marry someone and then ask them to be a different person. I had managed Frank and Linda. What I had not known was that Frank and Linda had been managing something else. The statement told me this. Not all of it. Not immediately. One statement is 1 month. 1 month is one data point. I am a person who works in financial services, and I know that one data point is not a pattern. I needed the pattern. I spent the next 3 Saturdays while Rachel visited her parents in Jackson Heights, doing something I had never done in 6 years of marriage. I went through everything. Every account, every statement, every transfer. 6 years of financial records that I had access to because I managed our household finances. Rachel had always deferred to me on the numbers, and I had always accepted that deferral without examining what it meant that she was not looking. She was not looking, which meant nobody was looking at what I found. What I found took me 3 Saturdays and 14 hours of work spread across them, and the specific focused attention of a person who does this professionally and knows where to look and what the patterns mean when he finds them. Here is what the pattern said. Over 6 years, Frank and Linda had received money from our household in the following ways. Direct transfers from our joint account to accounts held by Frank. Small enough individually to not trigger automatic attention, large enough cumulatively to matter. I added them up. $41,000 over 6 years. credit card charges on a card that was technically Rachel's, but that Linda used regularly for purchases that had nothing to do with our household. Groceries for their Jackson Heights apartment, medical copays. A vacation to Florida 2 years ago that I had been told was paid for by Frank's brother. The card statements told a different story. $22,000 over 4 years. Home improvement charges. Frank and Linda had renovated their kitchen 3 years ago. I remembered Rachel mentioning it. I remembered Frank saying he had gotten a good deal on the contractor. I found the contractor's invoices in a folder in our shared drive. Rachel had scanned them for some reason I could not reconstruct. And I found the payment records. Our payment records. Money transferred from our account to the contractor in 3 installments. $31,000. Various smaller things. Gifts that were actually loans that were never repaid. Emergency expenses that recurred with suspicious regularity. A car repair for Linda that happened 4 times in 2 years on a car that should not have needed 4 repairs. I added everything. $142,000. Over 6 years. From a marriage that had been working hard and living carefully and making choices about vacations, about savings, about the apartment we could afford, based on numbers that were not the actual numbers, because the actual numbers included $142,000 going to Frank and Linda in Jackson Heights. I sat with that number. I said nothing to Rachel. I started making a different kind of plan. The plan had 2 parts. The first part was understanding. I needed to know if Rachel knew. I need to be honest with you about how much depended on this question. If Rachel knew, if she had been aware and had hidden it from me, that was one story. A story that ended the marriage immediately and completely. I watched. I paid attention in the specific way of someone who has been doing this professionally for years, and knows how to read numbers, and also, it turned out, knows how to read people when he is paying the right kind of attention. Rachel did not know. I became certain of this over the first 2 months of watching. Not from one thing, from the accumulation of small things. The way she talked about money, with genuine uncertainty, with real questions, with the particular frustration of someone who felt like they were working hard and the numbers should be better than they were. The way she talked about her parents, with love, and with the specific mild exasperation of an adult child who manages her family's emotional demands, but has no awareness of managing their financial ones. She did not know. Frank and Linda had been taking money from a marriage that had one person managing the finances and another person trusting that person completely. They had found the gap between those 2 things, and they had used it for 6 years. Rachel was not complicit. Rachel was also not looking. The second part of the plan was building. I want to tell you about the building because it is the most important part, and because it is the part that required the most from me. I had always been good at my job. Solid, consistent, the kind of good that produces steady results, and steady compensation, and a steady life. I had not been ambitious in the way that my industry rewards, the aggressive, visible, self-promoting ambition that gets you noticed and promoted and into rooms where the real money is made. I had been content. I was no longer content. I called my manager on a Monday morning in March, and I said I wanted to talk about my trajectory. He said he was glad I had brought it up. We talked for an hour. What came out of that hour was a plan that required me to take on significantly more. More accounts, more responsibility, more of the New York financial world that I had been adjacent to for 9 years without fully entering. I entered it. I also started doing something I had thought about for 3 years and had always found reasons to delay. I started investing. Not through the firm, personally, carefully, with the specific knowledge of someone who does this professionally and knows which risks are real and which are performed, and how to build something quietly without it being visible to anyone who is not specifically looking for it. I built it quietly for 8 months. While Frank and Linda continued their pattern, I was still watching, still documenting, still adding to the number. I built. While Rachel visited her parents in Jackson Heights on Saturdays and came home with leftovers and stories and the particular warmth of a woman who loves her family, I built. While our apartment in Astoria had its regular Saturdays and its regular rhythms and its regular life, I built. I said nothing. I built it. Stop reading for 1 second and follow this page. I post every single week, and this story is not finished yet. The most important part is coming. Follow now and come back. And if you are on YouTube, please subscribe and hit the bell. What happens when he finally moves is the part that will make you put your phone down for a second. Subscribe. Come back. Month 7. My manager called me into his office on a Tuesday afternoon and told me I was being moved to a senior position. The kind of position that had a different title and a different salary and a different quality of room that it put you in. I said thank you. I went back to my desk. I updated the number in the spreadsheet I kept on a personal laptop that Rachel did not know about. The number was getting to where I needed it to be. Month 8. I was ready. I want to tell you about the Saturday I moved. Rachel was in Jackson Heights. Regular Saturday. I kissed her goodbye at 9 in the morning and said I had some work to catch up on, and she had said okay, and left with the tote bag she always took to her parents, and the particular ease of a woman who trusts her husband completely. I sat at the kitchen table where I had sat 8 months earlier with a bank statement that was not mine. I opened my personal laptop. I spent 4 hours moving money. Not our money, my money. The money I had built over 8 months in accounts that were mine specifically. Not joint, not shared, mine. Through the investments and the raise and the specific careful architecture of a person who had decided that the financial structure of his marriage needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. I moved it into a new account. Then I did the thing that was the actual move. I prepared the document. 8 months of records, every transfer, every credit card charge, every contractor invoice, every emergency that recurred. The full picture, $142,000, laid out in the specific clear language of someone who looks with numbers professionally and knows how to make a pattern undeniable. I printed it. I put it in a folder. I made coffee. I waited for Rachel to come home. She came home at 4:30 with leftovers in the tote bag, and her coat still on, and the specific energy of someone who has spent a Saturday with family, and is ready for the quieter part of the day. She said how the work was. I said fine. I said sit down. I need to show you something. She looked at me. She sat down. I put the folder on the table. I said I need you to look at this before I say anything. I need you to look at all of it. She opened the folder. She looked at it for a long time. I watched her read. I watched her face do the things faces do when they are processing something that is reorganizing their understanding of the past 6 years. The initial confusion. The specific moment when confusion becomes recognition. The moment after recognition when the full weight of what you are looking at lands. She turned pages. She went back to the beginning. She read it again. When she looked up, her eyes were very bright. She said, "How long have you known?" I said, 8 months. She said, 8 months? I said, yes. She said, and you did not? I said I needed to understand it fully before I said anything. I needed to know if you knew. She said, I did not know. I said, I know you did not know. I became certain of that in the first 2 months. She said, $142,000. I said, yes. She said, in 6 years. I said, yes. She looked at the table. She looked at me. She said, what do you want to do? I said that it depends on what you want to do. She said, what do you mean? I said, I mean this is your family. I am not going to make this decision for you. I'm going to tell you what I know, and I'm going to tell you what I've done. And then you are going to decide what you want to do with that information. She said, what have you done? I told her. The promotion, the investments, the 8 months of building. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Outside our Astoria windows, New York was doing its Saturday afternoon thing. The sound of the neighborhood, the N train in the distance, the city being the city. She said, you built all of that in 8 months. I said yes. She said, while managing all of this alone. I said yes. She said, why did you not tell me sooner? I said because I needed to be certain, and because I needed to be in a position where we had options. Right now, we have options. She said, what kind of options? I said, we can walk away from all of it. From your parents, from the pattern, from the 6 years of this. We have the resources to do that now. We can move, start clean, new apartment, new financial structure that has no gaps in it for anyone to use. She said, or. I said, or we confront it. Together, we sit your parents down and we put this on the table, and we tell them exactly what we know and exactly what stops today. And we rebuild the relationship on honest terms, or we find out it cannot be rebuilt. She looked at the folder. She said, I want to confront it. I said, you are sure? She said, they are my parents. I am furious at them. I am more furious than I have words for right now. But they are my parents, and I want to look them in the face, and I want them to look at me and explain this. She said, will you come with me? I said, yes. She said, today. I said, if you want. She said, I want. We drove to Jackson Heights that evening. Frank answered the door. The specific expression of a man who was not expecting his daughter on a Saturday evening. Surprise, then warmth, then something underneath the warmth that shifted when he saw my face. He said, Rachel. What? Rachel said, we need to come in. We came in. Linda was in the kitchen. She came to the living room. The four of us in the living room of the Jackson Heights apartment, with the renovated kitchen that our money had paid for. Rachel put the folder on the coffee table. She said, I need you to look at this. Frank looked at the folder. He looked at me. He looked at Rachel. He said, what is this? Rachel said, it is 6 years of our money. I need you to explain it to me. The room was very quiet. Linda sat down. Frank looked at the folder for a long time without opening it. He said, we were going to pay it back. Rachel said, 6 years. He said, things were difficult. He said, we did not want to worry you. Rachel said, you did not want to worry me. She said, $142,000, and you did not want to worry me. Linda said, Rachel. Rachel said, do not. She said, I need Dad to finish. Frank said, we made some bad decisions, some investments that did not work out, some debt that got away from us. He said, we were embarrassed. He said, we thought if we could just get through it quietly. Rachel said, through it with our money. Frank said, we were going to pay it back. Rachel said, when? Silence. Rachel said, I need to know something. She said, did you think I would not find out? Or did you think that even if I found out, it would not matter because I would choose you anyway? The room was very quiet. Linda said, you are our daughter. Rachel said, yes. She said, I am your daughter, and this is my husband, and this is our marriage. And for 6 years you made decisions inside our marriage without either of us knowing. She said, one of us still does not know because you used the gap between us to hide in. Frank looked at me. I said nothing. I had said everything I needed to say in our Astoria kitchen. Rachel said, here is what happens now. Frank said, Rachel. She said, here is what happens now. She said, everything stops today. Every transfer, every card, everything. And we are going to work out a repayment plan that is real and has a timeline and that you are going to stick to. And if you cannot stick to it, we are done. Not angry, just done. Because I cannot have this in my marriage. She said, do you understand? Frank and Linda looked at each other. Frank said yes. Linda said yes. Rachel picked up the folder. She stood up. She looked at her parents for a long moment. She said, I love you. That is not the question. The question was never whether I love you. She said the question was whether you love us enough to have been honest with us. She said, I hope the answer to that question changes going forward. She walked to the door. I followed her. We drove back to Astoria in the specific silence of two people who have just been through something significant together and do not need to fill the silence with anything. Halfway across the bridge, she reached over and put her hand on mine. She said, thank you for not telling me what to do. I said, it was your decision to make. She said, you built all of that so we would have options. I said, yes. She said, in 8 months. I said, yes. She looked at the city coming toward us across the water. She said, we are going to be okay. I said, yes. I said, we are going to be more than okay. Here is what I want to leave you with. When you find something that reorganizes the past 6 years of your life, the temptation is to react immediately, to confront, to explode, to make the moment as large as the feeling. I did not do that. I built first. I built so that when the moment came, we had options, so that the confrontation was not desperation, so that we were not standing in that Jackson Heights living room, needing something from Frank and Linda. We did not need anything from them. We had already built what we needed. That is the only kind of confrontation worth having, the one where you have already won, before the room knows there was a game. Drop your location in the comments. Tell me one word for where you are in your own story right now. Follow this page. Share this with someone who needs it.